Welcome, friends, to episode 274. I think that's what we're on of Color of Magic, your Magic Gaming podcast, where we talk about all types of issues that affect gamers at and away from their gaming tables and computers. I am your host, PowrDragn, dealing with construction and a million other things outside, so hopefully it doesn't disrupt the show too much. But with that, still got my main man, Brian Psionic. How's it going, dude?
Going well. As far as I know, no construction, which for Texas is a shock.
Yeah,
There's
no joke.
always
No joke.
something being rebuilt somewhere.
Yeah, it's one of those days where it's like construction and a couple of people doing yard work and just a million things. So, but it does sound like we're at the leaf blower cleaning stuff off the side phase. So hopefully that'll be done here in a few minutes. But we got a show to do. And before we get into it, want everybody to go over to patreon.com/color of magic. Pay your boys a little bit of support. We appreciate it. It'll help a whole lot. And you can get a shout out just like Jeffrey Ruff. So thank you for being a patron, Jeff. But that brings us to our lead story that came out 2 days after we were done recording last week. And magically, no pun intended, there was an announcement of a Magic movie out of the blue, live action, which was kind of crazy. And supposedly, I couldn't really discern if it's going to be tied to a separate live action TV show slash series or if they were referencing the animated thing. But either way, we're getting
Yeah,
a full-on live-action Magic movie.
yeah. The Brandon Routh, former Superman, the guy who was going to play Gideon Jira in the animated series, knew nothing about this. I'm thinking maybe the animated series has gone bye bye. That would explain why he knew nothing about any of this other stuff.
I don't know. That whole story when he came out was weird anyway, because like I said, we had already known that we were done with anything involving the Gideon arc of that thing, and that whole thing fell through. So it was weird that even popped up. So
I'm
yeah,
sure
no.
somebody probably asked the question, because hey, are you still doing this thing? And that's kind of what entertainment journalists do. Like,
Oh,
hey,
sure. It just got reported as new news, and it was kind of surprised that we already knew. That was the weird part.
I don't think we knew that the thing was dead, which is what he was saying.
I see. I was of the assumption like that was the story I'd read previously, like more than a year prior. That's why it was weird.
And
But
that's the thing, like it had been reported because, well, as well I do, kind of how these websites do. Like you can
sure,
report something, but the source
that
may be
aside,
unnamed. This was
it's
the
not
first,
really that big of a deal, all things considered. We just know he's not involved with it, or at least
yeah.
as far as we know. I mean, I guess they could bring him back and have him play him as an actual person in it. I
That's
don't
also true because
know.
honestly,
But yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a weird thing because it really just came out of the blue. Realistically, like nobody was really expecting anything like this. But we did get a very, very interesting piece of information. Now, whereas we talked about the animated series being a thing, and it's being run by a showrunner who has done Star Trek Picard, which was cool because I'm like, hey, there's a lot of reasons this could work. But for the actual live action, they have Legendary signed on to work on it. That's crazy.
yeah.
Like,
And apparently he's still working on the TV show, according to this article that I just saw.
okay, well, that's also interesting. So yeah, so as it turns out, for those who don't know about Legendary, the movie studio, not the game company, because Legendary Studios is a different thing than the actual like Hollywood production studio. But they've done a lot of like nerd and geek facing movies, right? They've done Pacific Rim, which
Yeah,
is basically kaiju and Voltron fighting each other, right? For a couple of movies.
and it's as awesome as it sounds.
Yeah, it was fun, right? Those were good. They also have done a couple of Godzilla movies,
Yep.
right? I think Dune is also the recent ones. They were ones
Okay.
involved with those. So they know the space. I mean, they have the ability to do visuals the way we would
Yep.
want them to be done for Magic. So I don't know, dude. How does that make you feel?
They have the technology. They can rebuild Magic, make it stronger and better than it was before. Kind of what we sound like. But yeah, I'm definitely excited about it. I'm always like, hey, what's up with the story? What's happening? Who's stabbing who and why? Where are we teleporting to? So this is obviously what I've wanted for a long time is an actual Magic cinematic universe, if you will, and possibly with a TV show tied into it some way. So I'm definitely extremely excited about it. And maybe someday, a crossover with D&D, then you get your whole, Marvel style cinematic universe going.
Yeah, that was the other thing too. I don't think I saw people really mentioned is that with a live action thing, now when we get around to doing another D&D movie, let's say in 2 years or 3 years, things willing, you're in season 2 or 3 of the Magic thing by then. Like that's kind of cool that you could have an actual, I guess we'd call it a Wizards of the Coast universe or
Right.
whatever, that you could have like D&D character show or the Magic players like plane jump to, I don't know, one of the D&D worlds if you want to, right? Like they could end up in Ravenloft or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that could be kind of cool. I mean, it's a thing we've not really been able to do before, but we've done it in cards, right?
Yeah.
So why not try doing it on the actual big screen
And you
if it
figure
makes
with the
everybody money?
setting being, very dragon and magic based, you figure one of those planes already probably has the D&D universe somewhere on it. They just have never, and now they may want to keep it separate, for storyline or licensing reasons, but obviously that fits in any number of planes we've already seen established.
Yeah, and if you're able to do a crossover with things you already own, that's the best deal.
Yep.
So hard to argue that one. But yeah, generally, I guess overall, do you view this as being good or bad?
I mean, I'm happy they're trying it. Obviously, we'll see what the final product looks like. There's been many times where like, man, I can't wait to see this movie. Then the actual thing comes out, like, oh my god, what like Green Lantern? I think it's the best example of Green Lantern is my favorite superhero, has been since I was a little kid. Then the movie came out. That that wasn't what I wanted.
Oh, bro, speaking of, did you see that they're actually going to do bowl cut Guy Gardner?
Yeah, and because it's James Gunn and Nathan Fillion, I trust them.
Oh, and people were so mad. They're like, he looks so stupid. I was like, of course, he's always looked stupid. That was
That
the whole
literally
thing.
is the thing. Guy
Yeah.
Gardner is supposed to be an idiot, but an idiot with enough willpower to use a Green Lantern ring.
But yeah, I'm with you, though. Talking about the Magic movie, I think this is one of those ones where you want to be cautiously optimistic.
Yeah,
Kind of in the same space I'm sitting with the animated show right now, right? You've done the right things, you've gotten the right people, you have the right partners. What's the final outcome going to look like? Because I think no matter what they choose, fans are not going to be happy, right? There's going to be some portions like,
yeah.
I don't know why they went with the Brothers War. I don't know why they're covering the Phyrexians. I don't know why they didn't set it on, I don't know, Zendikar or whatever, right? Somebody's going to be upset about something. But really, it's like, what is the quality of the final product? Because I think that's always been one of the issues with Magic is that it's not, unless you base it all in one plane, maybe two, right? It's hard to do that because none of the planes look the same. So you can't excuse me, you can't like reuse a goblin design, whether that's costume or CGI, because the goblins on Zendikar look different than the goblins on Phyrexia or the goblins in Muraganda or whatever, right? They're all going to look different. Even just the landscape looks different, right? If you go to Zendikar and all the hedrons and this, that, and the other, like the stuff you got to generate to make that, and then you're like, okay, we're gonna go to Ravnica, and it's just a bunch of buildings in a city or whatever, right? Like, so
Or it's just one house.
yeah, exactly. Or in the case of Dustmorn, it's just hallways and house, right? I don't know. So I think that's going to be the interesting thing of how do you approach the story? Where is it based? What characters are involved? Honestly, I think if you're going safe, you probably just do Dominaria or Ravnica because those are like the most normal, I would say. So as far as like designing your buildings or
Yeah,
costumes or CGIing stuff you're gonna have in the background, that's probably the easiest. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what they choose because I have no idea. I think overall, though, when you're talking about extending Magic as a brand, having more revenue streams, obviously being able to sell merch, bring people in to buy more cards, like TV and big screen are kind of the places Magic has never been.
exactly.
So at least give it a shot. I mean, again, even if it flops, I'm with you. I would rather you just at least take the shot at it and see what happens because we don't know otherwise,
Yeah,
right?
because like you said, this is a 30-year brand. How many 30-year brands at this point haven't tried to dive into some sort of, I guess maybe the other one is Warhammer. From what I understand, Henry Cavill is working on Warhammer movies. movies. So
Yeah. But hell, at least Warhammer has a series of video games that are somewhat cinematic. Right?
yeah.
We don't really have that for Magic even. But all right, let's get into the soapbox because there's a couple of things here. And my rant this week, it's twofold, but in the same space. And it comes down to people talking as experts on a thing when they don't know anything about the thing. And I hate it because one, look at the world around us. That's kind of how we got to where we are now. But two, I think the issue is that it leads to actual problems. And the two examples I have this week are one happened on my YouTube channel. Somebody made a comment about Radiant Lotus, the new card in Aetherdrift, only existing because Wizards was printed that as a make good for the other recent bans and Commander. Talking about the Crypt and whatever, and the Jeweled Lotus. I got there's like two Lotuses we're talking about here. But I had to explain to them that's not how it works. Like, one, we don't print things or design things just as a make good for their thing. I don't even know if a time that's happened. If it has, it's a rare occurrence. The other is that those just got announced a few months ago, just before the last Magic Con, actually. This card would have been in design or started its design journey almost 2 years ago, right? It would have been on the final print sheets and everything go to the printer probably 9 months ago. So there had been no way for this to really make sense. And then they literally were trying to argue, well, if that's the case, how come this came out here? And it's like, but I'm telling you literally how the design timeline works. Like, I don't, like, that's not a thing. Like, artwork's been commissioned, people had to edit the cards, it eventually goes to a file, and then it gets ready to go to the printers. Like, I don't that's not like, it would have been ready to go to the printers at the time those other announcements were made. So it's like, that's not like, dude, that's not at all how this works. The bigger problem, though, is I'm in a Magic group and somebody's complaining about how their game store charges more than some of the prices they can find online. Fine, that's a real thing. That's typical, not an abnormal conversation. However, we get to a point where people say, oh, it's because your local store is ripping you off. They're getting boxes for $60. And I'm like, well, that's not true because they weren't $60 back in 2015, 2016. They haven't been $60, I'm pretty sure, since prior to 2010. And then I have somebody come behind me and say, oh, well, I have a tax ID and I'm getting them for that price. And I'm like, this is not true. Like, Card Kingdom, when I worked there, I don't think it's a secret for me to tell you this, that they weren't getting them for $60 a box. And literally, there were pallets of Magic cards coming in when a set got released. So I'm like, what are we doing? What, like, the bad part about that is you're now going to have some number of people in this group who see this that are now going to be angry at their local game stores because some idiots are trying to claim that prices are a thing that they're simply not.
And if you were getting them for that price, you'd shut the F up, because how much money would you be making if you were selling them to somebody at markup?
Oh, for sure.
You wouldn't, you would be, you would tell nobody you were getting that good a deal. Why would you?
For sure. And I've talked with other people who worked for other online shops. I'm like, hey, out of curiosity, like, maybe y'all are just getting a better deal and I just don't know. And he's like, no, prices ain't been that way for more than a decade, probably two. And I was like, okay, so I'm not crazy. So it's frustrating when you see people who literally are just wanting to talk like experts when they just don't know about a thing. And at least, even if you think you know, and somebody who is in that field can point stuff out as to why it's wrong, just have a little mea culpa and be like, hey, you're right. I thought this, I read this thing, it wasn't right, whatever the case is. But then they'll just double down on it. And I'm just like, I don't know. And it's just not worth the time, unfortunately, to even try to argue these people. Because even if I show them an invoice that I still have from an old thing sitting in the closet, all you get is like, oh, well, you just weren't getting the best price. I guarantee you. So I'm like, I'm not even going to bother. Like, what's the point? Like, it's just,
I mean,
This is
once
how we get
somebody has
these.
started lying, they ain't gonna stop because nobody likes being caught in a lie.
That's sad but true. And it's just like, man, this is how things get to be effed up. Like at some point, if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you don't know, you don't know, and that's okay. Like just say you don't know. That's how you learn things. I mean, hell, there's a bunch of things I
If you like learning, with these are, you gotta,
fair,
you know,
fair.
but
You got to
that's
like learning.
the era we're in.
But there are a ton of things where I thought I knew, and then I'll come across something. I'll be like, oh damn! Like now I got to go down a rabbit hole and look up some stuff because this doesn't work how I thought it worked, or whatever. Or even working on something for my setup, I thought it should be easy, and then I'm like, oh, it's because I didn't know about these two or three things. But I can't imagine how people live like that. Just, I mean, I guess I can imagine because we're seeing it, but how some people just assume they're right when you literally have experts telling you you're not right. And you don't even have proof as to why you would believe what you believe, other than, well, local stores are always trying to rip you off. So they have to be charging, by their estimate, 2.5 times, what they're like. I guarantee that's just not the case. It's just not. So yeah, anyway, being a former retail store owner, that really got to me because I'm like, some stores are now going to have some number of customers that are upset because they read this crap and they didn't do anything wrong. Like they're going to lose some amount of sales because they're just doing everything normally and correctly because these other idiots are online chasing away their customers. And it's just like, what are we doing?
And again, if you got a good store, go there, shop there. You know, I wish I had a place. You know, a place within, let's say 15 or 20 minutes of me to hang out, get comics, play cards, do those things. So yeah, please
Yeah,
support your store.
I've told
I'm
people, like,
begging you.
I get it if there's a huge price discrepancy, right? Just on anything. If you can go online and get it for 100 and you can't find it anywhere locally for less than 140, then yeah, absolutely you go ahead and buy it online, right? But when it's, I can get it for 115 locally at my local store and it's 100 online, I'll just give the $15 to my local
Yeah,
store just for being around, for me to be able to go and buy stuff and have it when I want it and
yeah.
hang out with
Play
friends
with
or
other
whatever.
people.
Yeah, it's worth it. But
The
anyway, that's it.
gathering really is the best part, y'all.
Yeah, that's my rant because I'll keep going on this. But anyway, what do you got?
I believe I said last week, that we got to check that somebody will probably be getting laid off during the course of this podcast that we won't know about. Yeah, that's pretty much true because high res games, they do or they used to do paladins. They're basically they do. I guess their biggest game, well, definitely their biggest game now, is Smite 2. Magic worked with them a couple of years ago on a promotion for Smite, which is a MOBA in which the main characters are gods. And so Smite 2 is, in theory, still going to be fully staffed. Everything else they make is getting, the servers will remain up. And, we talked about that. That's kind of a dubious thing. You know how it usually goes is they said they're not going to update the games anymore. So a bunch of people quit playing. And they're like, well, we kept the servers up, but nobody was playing. So that's probably how that's going to go. But yeah, as of right now, all that High Res is going to be working on is Smite 2, which is unfortunate. I mean, I hope Smite 2 does well. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I mean, I've heard good things from people that are fans of the Smite franchise. And it's I played a bunch of Smite 1, and yeah, it's definitely fun game, fun concept. I hope they're focusing all the resources on this game is able to save some people's jobs, turn things around. But that is the industry we're in right now, and so many people losing jobs. It's really just week after week, day after day. It just and it's just sad. I wish I had wish I had the resources to hire and help people.
Man, is Smite just getting their lunch eaten by Raid Shadow Legends or something? Like I don't I don't really
I
know that.
understand Smite, I think, is doing well, but I guess nothing else. Paladins is kind of like in Overwatch style games. Overwatch
Oh yeah.
is getting its lunch eaten. So obviously, I'm sure Paladins was. It's probably like the third or fourth most popular hero shooter, and in this environment, that's just not good enough.
Yeah.
Corpse of Concord, cough, cough.
I feel this maybe comes back to some of what we've been talking about for the last couple of years. Is just there's so much good quality out there, and people only have so much time.
Yeah, that is absolutely the thing because we talked about it on here before. There's studies that show that still millions of people to the two of the most popular games are Grand Theft Auto Online and Fortnite. Fortnite is 7 years old, and Grand Theft Auto 5 is what had passed the 10-year
I was gonna
mark.
say it's got to
That's
be a 10-year-old game at this point.
so and they don't lose players for the most part. So you got those two big sharks eating up all the tiny, and that is not how the industry used to work. It used to be you had to put out a brand new Madden game each year. With Madden still has to, or Activision still got to put out a brand new Call of Duty game each year. For them to put out games that are at this point 10 years old and it's still dominant game, it's changed the landscape.
Yeah, but I think we see that across the board, right? Even in card games, when new stuff comes out, people are reluctant because it's like if it's not Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh,
Yeah,
how much traction is it going to get without having a big license backing it or something, right?
right.
We see it in MMOs because people still pretty much play Warcraft and Final Fantasy. Was it 14 or whatever? Like those,
Yeah.
kind of like the only ones I hear anybody.
That's another example of where the top two have been the top two for years. And
Yeah, I mean it's an unfortunate. It's an unfortunate thing for the studios for sure because there's a lot of people working hard on a lot of those games.
yeah.
But I think when you start talking about like economic stuff, people's time and attention being split, I even saw some stuff in some recent Reddit groups where people are starting to just move toward more like single player, just offline, whatever games for their just casual fun. So they're playing.
Especially if you were part of the PlayStation Network outage where people learned how many of even their single player games
Mm,
still had to talk to their server for anything to work. It was miserable this past weekend.
there you go. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, right? I think people have one or two games they're playing online, whether it's like MOBAs or whatever, right? I got to get on and play with people. And then you have your couple that you're just playing by yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't, we talked about it last week. Companies are still out here thinking you got to have these online services games. And I think people are scaling back a little bit on that.
Yeah, the corpses of live service games are just piling up right now. Suicide Squad. I mean, Concord was dead on arrival,
Yeah. And
essentially.
that thing barely got 5 weeks.
Yeah, after millions of dollars being poured into that joint. So yeah, just live services. God, I just saw where a publisher was saying they think the reason EA say they think the reason Dragon Age failed because not live service enough. No, that wasn't it. That was not it, EA.
Hell, you have probably had a better chance because it didn't have a bunch of live service connected to
Yeah.
it. But all right, let's talk about what we learned because there's actually some positive here, I think, finally. So why don't we do a follow up here? What you got?
Yeah, we've been talking about how Overwatch has desperately needed to respond to Marvel Rivals, and we finally got the spotlight. They said, hey, please come back. You're going to love all this stuff. And yeah, they really seem like they're cooking. They talked for about 40 minutes today, so I'll hit some of the highlights. Perks. This is going to be basically the biggest addition to the game in pretty much ever. Characters will have perks. There'll be skill trees where you unlock, and it literally will change the way you play some of these characters. Like one of the ones they showed, if you happen to play Farah or familiar with Farah, she's a flying character with a jetpack, and she has a concussive blast that kind of usually shoots people off the map or towards some kind of optical dash kind of thing, where she can actually make everybody kind of like suction everybody in and then throw bombs on them. And each character is getting 2 or 3 things like that. So that's going to be huge. That'll be may depend on the map, may depend on what opponent you're going against as to how you do that. They're going to have voting on maps. That's the thing that a lot of competitive games have, but for whatever reason, Overwatch has never done that until now. They're going to have 6v6 game modes are coming back. We kind of had a feeling that was coming because they've been testing that for a while now. So, yeah, this is a bunch of stuff that I'm pretty sure we would have not gotten had Marvel Rivals not come in and just really been kind of stomping on them for the past couple of months. Looks incredible. I'm picking up Overwatch this week for the first time in several months just to see kind of how things are going.
Though, This is an example of sometimes competition is just good,
Right?
right? Like, because this is likely, considering how many things it is in this announcement, some number of these were probably already kind of in the hopper or
Yeah, they were
in the
supposed.
game plan.
I think perks and skill trees were supposed to happen at the launch of Overwatch 2, and then they just looked around the environment. How many copies we selling? We still good? All right, yeah, none of those things. Lay a bunch of people off.
Well, see, and that's the thing, right? They might have been sitting on these, be okay, let's dole this out in 6 months and let's put this other one out at the 12-month mark and whatever. But when you have competition breathing down your throat, you're like, okay, we got to start putting the bells and whistles on this stuff and
Yep.
roll it out because, otherwise we're going to lose a bunch of market share. So, yeah,
Somebody over
it's
at Diddy's
good.
was like, "Hey, you like Overwatch? Yeah. How much did you like Overwatch? If it had Spider-Man in it." Turns out the other was a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah. And again, I tell this is Marvel Rivals is a good example of why licensing works, right? There's attachment to the characters, there's history built up, there's already a pre-built reason for somebody to be attached to your game. Whereas when it's brand new and you have to create all these characters and get people attached in the backstory, whatever, it takes longer, right? Because when you
Yep.
try a new game, you don't know anybody. You have to kind of get attached to that character over time. Whereas
Right?
Marvel Rivals comes out, if I go download it tomorrow, I'm like, sweet, there's a Wolverine, there's a Black Panther, there's
Yep.
Captain America, like let's go. So yeah, very, very big difference there. But it sounds like I'm with you. People sound happy about these changes.
And some of the innovations are thinking, people would talk about, especially the haters, like, "Hey, this is just Overwatch with Marvel characters." Yep. Everybody and Overwatch is Counter Strike with
Yeah,
kind of superhero inspired characters, and so on and so on. And yeah, this spotlight you saw, they took some of the stuff from Marvel Rivals that clearly worked. Like Namor is a turret based character. He shoots a little octopus turrets that fire things. He can stick them anywhere, like to the walls, behind somebody's head or whatever. Lo and behold, Overwatch is a turret character, Torbjorn. Now he can throw his turrets onto walls and
yeah.
behind
Why
you in
not?
any location. Like, hey, that's a good idea. We're stealing that.
I mean, we literally, well, whatever the game was we had 4 years ago, whatever that literally we all thought was just going to be Diablo with magic. And we were like all excited, like we're gonna get to play
Yeah.
Diablo with the magic skin, hell yeah! And then we got something that wasn't Diablo and magic, and we were like, "What's this crap?" You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
That's not what we wanted.
but that's exactly. Sometimes the obvious thing is the good thing, and that's okay. If somebody has already done a thing well, don't try to reinvent the
Yeah.
wheel.
Me and you talk about how between the two of us, how many games do we play and or cover a year? Hundreds. And at the end of the year, I may be able to list 10 or 15 that did something that I've just never seen before. Balatro, never seen anything like it.
Elatro's crazy, dog.
That's why he got nominated for so many Game of the Year awards, because there is nothing any other company was doing that is anything like it.
Like using Balatro as an example too of what studios could be doing. Like it's cheap because I think on if you get it on Steam, it's like $11, and I think if you get it on the App Store, it's like $8 or $9. No DLC, no nothing, and there are huge communities for this game.
Yeah.
I told you, I downloaded it, and man, it had me in a chokehold for like 3 days.
Right?
Like for real. I'm like, I had to tell me I'm just not gonna touch the game today because it's starting to hurt my
Yeah,
productivity.
exactly.
Like,
So many games are like that.
so yeah,
I don't, as I said, out of all the games I cover, by the end of the year, that's easily a couple of hundred, if not, 1,000 or more. As I said, there'll be 10 or 15 I can legitimately say something completely new. Most of them are, this is Overwatch and Marvel characters, or,
yeah,
it's Magic with League of Legends characters, so on. Everything is like it's an iteration of something that's come before with a twist on it or a license that hadn't been used before.
I mean, every fantasy RPG at this point is either basically going to be Final Fantasy, Skyrim, or Fable, right? Basically, like now that we've seen all the things those can do, so it's just like, all
Yeah.
right, cool, this is what they are. So hard to be mad about that. But that's good news. One thing that came up for me this week was that I was reminded how little people know about dice. And I think it's because like we live in a world now where if you want dice that change color to your touch or have moving liquid in them or whatever, right? Dice made from precious stones, like we can get all types of dice now. But I had some people comment because I forgot about a video I'd posted. It was one of my first like 10 maybe TikTok videos where I was digging through my closet and I found some old dice and I thought I would just educate people and hey, this is what old dice used to be like. Where you used to buy them on a sprue, right? It would have like almost like a sprig that just had your 6 dice or whatever on it. And you would clip them off and you'd have to like file down the little edge. And even the next level where they came separate from that, like they still didn't have colors. Like the die itself was colored. It'd be red or black or whatever, but the numbers weren't. So you would literally take a Crayola crayon, a wax crayon, and just like rub it over the numbers so it filled it in, and then you just scrape off the excess. So now you can see the number 1 on your blue die or whatever because you scraped a white Crayola over it. And just even showing people that was kind of interesting. And now people thought I was like a dice expert at that point. Like, can you show us this? And do you have this? And it's like, oh no, I just happen to have these in my closet. And know a
Once
little bit about
YouTube
them.
says you or TikTok says you are, you almost are.
Yeah, so that was a little awkward, but I just thought it was a fun interaction to kind of remind people that again, we live in a world where nerddom now is very common, and everybody wants custom dice, whether for their D&D stuff, for their favorite board game, whatever the case is. And we can get dice in every color of the rainbow with swirls, with glitter, with whatever, and that just wasn't the case in the beginning. Now we have companies that only make dice and they make millions a year, which is amazing that we live in that world and how far that's come.
We have lived long enough to where when we were kids, especially if the wrong group of people came around, you couldn't admit you were a nerd. You might
No.
you might be subject to violence for being into some kind of nerdy thing. Now it's the opposite. Now people are like, you ain't no nerd.
Yeah,
You
now you're a
faking
fake
for the
nerd. Yeah,
content.
yeah, yeah.
You ain't really play all those games.
Like how wild is that? Like you now get called out for being a fake nerd, which half the time you're just not nerding like somebody wants you to nerd, which is
Right.
really the issue.
Just in 20, 30 years, the whole just the way that is flipped around is mind-boggling to me. I'm
But if you think about it though, like every major property right now that makes a ton of money, the majority of them happen to be nerd based. Whether you're talking about action films,
yeah.
the Marvel Studio stuff, comic books, video games. It's like this is the stuff we grew up with that's
If you'd have
actually
told
turning into
me
stuff.
if you told me when I was a kid that my auntie would be into Thor, I mean, no, you on crack.
Bro, my
That's
mom
not going
likes
to
the
be a thing,
Spider-Man movies.
right?
Like
Never, you could have never envisioned anything like that years ago.
nah, it's a good time to be a nerd for sure. But all right, let's knock out a couple of quick topics here. Nope, wrong drop. Why are we doing that? We got
Let's do the wrong drop.
All right. So, in a very interesting thing here, we found out last week. Actually, I say last week, it was 2 days ago, that a person online that goes by K. Arsenault Rivera, which I believe is one of the writers of Magic Story, posted that they found out that Magic Story is going to be eligible for a Hugo Award, which is a big writing award.
Yeah.
Kind of surprising for as much as people want to poo-poo Magic Story sometimes. Kind of cool that they're eligible for one of the biggest writing awards.
Yes, Lord. That's
And
what I. This is like the week I'm just getting fed. Magic movie we're talking about.
yeah,
Magic stories win awards. Like, see, I told you the lore is interesting and be kind of important. And just
yeah. At the
too
very least,
good.
it's well written,
Yeah,
and got somebody's attention. So that's kind of a cool little surprise. I think things like that happened on the edge or outside the industry sometimes that people may not notice. But it does say that, like, even if you don't necessarily like a certain story, it's at least well written and they're getting good writers and it's being well sourced. So it's not crap. You know what I mean? It might not be your vibe, but there's enough people that believe it's good enough that it's up against other fantasy writings.
right.
So that's got to count for something.
The Hugo's like you basically the Pulitzer for fantasy.
Yeah, basically. And I'll say this, like I'll admit I am one of the most guilty when it comes to lore on anything, whether it's a board game, card game, video game. I have literally played through RPGs and barely remember the story like a month later. Like I'm that guy. So I'm just as guilty as a lot of people. So I
And
can't.
like we were saying, we're not telling you how to nerd. If you really, don't care to know all the inner workings, you absolutely, you obviously can play the game without knowing any of those things.
For sure. But I want to be clear. So I'm not sitting here looking like I'm casting stones for my glass house. Like y'all should be paying attention to the story. Like I should be paying attention to the story too. So like I'm just as bad. But it is cool that for people who are into it, that there's at least some recognition attached to it, which is kind of awesome. I'm always happy for my fellow nerds to get recognition for their
Right?
things. This is another thing I wanted to point out that I found this out. Oh, when was this? Earlier today, I came across this. But Unity, who makes a ton of stuff
Yeah.
for technology as far as like the background systems of stuff, yeah, they released even more people. And I was not aware that over the last 6 years, they have released a total of almost 3,500 employees. I don't even know how many people are left working when you've released that many over
And I
6 years.
Unity forms the backbone of so many of our gaming experiences. So that's just concern. Anytime there's job losses of that magnitude, it is disconcerting. But to think about the number of things that Unity is responsible for in this space, we're gonna feel that at some point. I promise you.
Oh, they have to. Like something's going to break, or some programmer who would normally be overseeing something's not going to be there.
Somebody's launch gonna be even worse than your typical console launch.
Actually, no, I got that wrong. It's 6 waves of cuts in 3 years, not 6 years. So I want to get that correct.
Yeah, that's
But I will say the craziest thing about this one is that a bunch of people found out in an email that went out at 5 in the morning. So some people just woke up. I guess they were going to start getting ready for work 6, 7 o'clock, and then went, "The hell, I'm being released." So that.
that's definitely better than making you work the entire day and firing you. I've seen people do that before.
Oh, sure, but that's
But
just kind of surprising and a tough way to find out. But
yeah,
yeah, so Unity. So if it can happen to them, it can happen to anybody. Because like you're saying, they're the backbone of a lot of different processes and engines for things. So I don't know what that looks like, but
I
definitely
don't know when
something.
this bloodbath in our industry stops. I'm hoping and praying it soon because we can't sustain this and still keep putting out products.
Oh, definitely not. Like at some point, you will have to see the number of video games slow down of releases yearly because it's just not going to be possible. But other interesting news, I don't know, positive or negative, depending on your perspective, is we had a good discussion around Commander that was purposeful this time. People weren't just mad because something got banned. But yeah, so the bracket thing had been announced, or at least I don't know. I was gonna say foreshadowed, I guess, is probably the more accurate word, a while back. And we'd been working on this behind the scenes, and the first version of it, the beta version, went out publicly. And there's a lot. I think there's a lot of good, a lot of bad. There's a lot that's gonna have to be kind of tested publicly to see what the vibe check is on it. But the biggest thing was wanted to get it out ahead of Chicago because that'll be the first real time that you can have thousands of people playing with strangers and testing the new rule sets, basically. So we'll see how it goes. But realistically, right now, the goal is to try and somewhat normalize games to a more even level or expectation when you're playing in what we call untrusted environments. Not that the people aren't trustworthy, but just you just don't know them yet and y'all haven't had conversation, you haven't played each other before, so you don't really know. So like hopefully this will make for some better games, but if not, there's feedback that'll come back. And of course, if you have feedback from playing at your local stores or whatever, hit us up. We're available. We want to know. But I don't know, dude, what have you been seeing around this? Because I'm sure it was all over your feed as well.
Yeah, like you said, I think people are trying to kind of trying to get a hold of it because this didn't really before I think we had Rule Zero, and that was pretty much all the discussion there was on power level. So now we've gone kind of from one rule to how many? Is it 5 brackets? How many brackets
Yeah,
are there?
5 brackets.
So yeah, I think especially when you look at that, it seems kind of it seems like it's a lot to wrap your head around. I'm sure at the beginning it will be a lot to wrap your head around, and kind of as it goes on, I guess people will get more accustomed to it. And like as you said, y'all are taking feedback, so if something's not working, they'll get to change it at some point. So the person I worry about is somebody that's probably never played Commander before, coming in and find out about 5 brackets for somebody with no experience. That is going to seem really intimidating, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think there's probably the 3 major points for me. And we've discussed this behind the scenes, so I can say this publicly. It's not like anything super secret there. But part of it is just kind of what you're saying, right? There's more to absorb when you're stepping in and deck building and doing all that, right? Like that's going to be a real thing that people have to get adjusted to. It's not hugely different, but it's different enough that it's a new thing you have to pay attention to.
And
The
I guess I
other
would say if you're not going to play competitively, then there's only 4 brackets you need to
Well,
worry
yeah, basically.
about. Also that.
The one of the other ones too is just the amount of maintenance for the commander format panel, right? Like, does the list of game changers expand, reduce? Are they treated differently in some way? Like that list now needs a kind of its own separate curation. I don't know if I'd say regularly, but it's something you have to pay attention to now and make adjustments as new cards or new sets or whatever come out. So that is something that if it catches on and we decide this is a good thing, it's kind of a new piece of work that's got to be there. And then the third thing, and this is probably, I guess this also is something I've seen many times with a bunch of games on the retail level, is that there's always people who want to be the big fish, small pond, and they're going
Yeah.
to min max, and they're going to use whatever rules are available as their shield, right? So the reason that's concerning is when, for at least for me, my view is that when it's kind of more free form, I guess if you will, it's a little harder for them to have that shield of like, but I'm doing everything fairly, right? When in this case, you might go, all right, what's the most obscene deck I can build, but it's only like bracket 2 or 3. Now they're going to play when somebody's mad, they'll be like, well, I'm not playing any of these questionable cards, or I'm building this way. Even though it's not within the spirit of the rules, there's always going to be those people. So it's going to be curious to see how many of those we see coming out of Chicago or people's local stores or whatever over the next month and see how much of an impact that is. But otherwise, it's a new guideline. It's worth trying out. And I'm a big fan of trying new things at the very least because we'll probably learn something either way.
Now, can you go? I guess lower power than what the format is supposed to have. Will people be upset at you about that?
Rarely. I mean, the
Okay.
only time people would be mad is like if everybody in the pool wanted to play something competitive and then you just didn't contribute to the game, it's just not going to be fun for anybody.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you're not going to do anything. You're not really playing into their decisions. So that's just not a good play experience, in general. But yeah, it'd be
I'm
interesting.
sure a lot of people are just going to want to play. Like, I mean, probably the next game I play, I'm going to want to play a Fallout deck, regardless of what else is happening. I'm just here to
Yeah,
play with my Fallout cards.
and there's nothing wrong with that. I say go for it. But all right, that being said, did want to use this time in the dinner table for something a little bit different because it is Black History Month and we're on day 12 as of this recording. I thought, what if we recommended or directed people in the way of a couple of other Black content creators? And my first thought was there was a couple that stand out immediately. And we've talked about him before in the show, but Joe Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Like with Tabletop Jocks, who brings in all types of people. He does the cookout every year, all that stuff. So that's one, especially if you're a commander player, he's one of the people you can follow if you want to add some melanin, add some color to your variety of creators that you follow. Also, and we've had him on the show, the guys over at One More Mana,
Yeah.
right? Those dudes. That's a trio of guys that are super funny. Like
Definitely.
always honestly, they're funny while not even trying to be funny
Yeah,
sometimes.
I mean, my wife only knows about magic what she has learned from being married to me. Doesn't actively seek any more magic information. And I was listening to one more man. Even she came in the room like, "Who are those guys? They're funny."
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, totally worth following, and they're good supporters of their communities. They do a lot in the Atlanta community. As a matter of fact, they're going to be doing some stuff with MagicCon Atlanta later this year. So yeah, just those are the ones I would recommend. I don't know if there's anybody on your radar, card games, video games,
I was
whatever.
I
But
was gonna say one more mana. So you
yeah,
and we as you mentioned, we have had them on the show. At some point, I'll try to find exactly what episode that was and give y'all a link to it.
but yeah, they're just good people out there. And the reason we bring it up is that the way just social media works in general with all the systems and algorithms is generally people already are inclined to find people that look like them or whatever. It's just nature of humans. But then with that, the systems also recognize that and they're going to show you more of the same. So you may not even know these people exist. So sometimes you need people like us to point them out so you can even find them. So hopefully that helps you add a little bit of color to your viewing experience. But otherwise, Brian, why don't you everybody we can find you on social media?
All right. App Trigger is on Facebook, so stop by there and I'll be giving you links to all the stories about all this wild stuff that's going on in the video game industry. Some good, unfortunately, fair amount of it bad, but we're covering all of it.
Yeah, so you can't don't have a choice these days. But if you want to follow me, you can find me at PowrDragn, PowrDragn on most social platforms. And my goodness, we have a ton of stuff coming out on the YouTube channel for Ether Drift, so you should probably get over there and follow so you don't miss out. But as always, wherever you are watching or listening, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Please remember to take care of yourselves and your family because there's so much stuff going on right now. Remember to be awesome. And genuinely, the most important thing is be awesome to each other.